Hello and welcome to tonight's Live from Paris. I'm Belle Lupton. It's 10 p.m. in the French capital. Let's get you up to date with the headlines. Turkey's president widens his purges across education, military and the courts in the wake of a failed coup on Friday. So far, about 60,000 have been dismissed or detained. Republicans in the US gear up for day 3 of their party convention in Ohio, a trademark grand entrance for newly confirmed nominee Donald Trump, who will introduce his running mate for vice president. And France extends its state of emergency by a further 6 months in the wake of last week's attack in Nice. The shockwaves reach Paris, where some outdoor events have been cancelled. Thanks for being with us here on France 24. We begin in Turkey, where the President Erdogan has intensified his crackdown to include the media, education and the military after Friday's failed coup attempt. About 60,000 people are now thought to have been dismissed or to be held in detention. New emergency measures are expected after Erdogan held an emergency meeting with the National Security Council. Turkey's purge is likely to take aim at his perceived political enemies, as Julia Seeger explains.
Before a falling out in 2013.
Well, for more on this, let's speak to Henry Barkey, Director of the Middle East Programme at the Woodrow Wilson International Centre for Scholars in Washington, D.C. He joins us now via Skype. Henry, thanks for being with us. And this fresh wave of dismissals targets teachers here. So the licences of 21,000 private school teachers, for example, are currently in the process of being revoked. That raises some pretty serious questions about basic freedoms in Turkey, doesn't it?
Of course it does. I mean, look, you can't dismiss people suddenly without a code of law. I mean, these people make a living out of this, and you just imagine their families. So it's very worrisome. I mean, there's no question about it.
And Erdogan said that he would not rule out the death penalty. Does this show for you the direction of travel that Turkey's leadership might be taking?
Well, look, what he said is that if Parliament votes for the death penalty, he will consider it and may even sign it. But I think at this stage, he is a little bit playing to the cards. In the end, I'm pretty sure he will not do it. You have to understand, I mean, in some ways, people are really mad in Turkey. I mean, and they have every right to be, because this military coup was a little bit unusual in the sense that they really did target civilian institutions. They bombed the parliament. So from that perspective, I mean, Turkey, which has had 4 successful and two unsuccessful coups, this is the 3rd unsuccessful coup, had never seen this kind of violence before. So that's the background, if you want, for these calls for the death penalty. But my hunch is that given the reaction in Europe, he probably will not do it, even though he's now saying, well, the world is not Europe. Turkey's been waiting to get into Europe for 53 years. So this is a little bit bravado. We'll see. Time will tell.
And Erdogan, of course, has been calling for Fethullah Gulen, the US-based Muslim cleric, to be extradited back to Turkey. What might that, on top of what we've already been discussing, do to relations not only between Turkey and the US, but also between Turkey and the EU?
Well, first of all, in order for Gulen to be extradited, they have to send an accusation, and this has to be essentially adjudicated through the American court system. The United States is not going to send somebody back just because another country wants him or her. Right, so this will take a long time. It will take a long time to prepare the file. It will take a long time for judges here to study it and look at it. And you can be sure that Mr. Gulen is also going to hire the best lawyers you can find in the United States, and they will try to shoot holes through the prosecution or through the Turkish government's case, and expect that this will take 2-3 years. So nothing is going to happen immediately. Then the question is, and this is where I think your question is leading, is what happens with Turkish-American relations, also to in Turkey now there's this expectation that Fethullah Gulen should be extradited immediately. And when people get frustrated with the lack of movement, what will that do to ordinary relations between Turks and Americans and so on and so forth? And so this is the worrisome part. But I don't think that the Gulen case will be resolved anytime soon. And I think, I mean, on one issue on the Gulen front, I think we should also say that what is interesting is that people keep saying that the Gulen followers infiltrated the Turkish state. And this is not true. They did not infiltrate the Turkish state. They were invited in to the Turkish state by Mr. Erdogan himself. And between 2002 and 2013, those two were real collaborators, real allies. I mean, and it's only when they had a fallout in 2003 that you've seen a reaction towards the Gulen followers. But until then, things were hunky-dory. So I think there's this kind of misnomer or this confusion about the Gulen movement and the state in Turkey.
Thank you very much, Henry Barkey. Thank you for being with us here on France 24, Director of the Middle East Programme at the Woodrow Wilson International Centre in Washington, D.C. Now, in the coming hours, Republican delegates and their guests will return to an arena in Cleveland, Ohio, for the third evening of the party's convention. At last night's event, Donald Trump was formally crowned the Republican nominee for the president in November's general election. In the end, the anti-establishment tycoon won the nomination with 89 delegates more than he actually needed. The theme for this evening, Make America First Again, which will feature speeches of support from some of the men Trump beat in the primaries. And it'll end with the formal introduction of Mike Pence, the vice presidential candidate and Indiana governor. Well, our correspondent Catherine Norris-Trent is in Cleveland, Ohio, waiting for things to start up again. And Catherine, you were there when Trump made what we can only call his normal grand entrance to Cleveland.
Yeah, it was pretty spectacular. Hundreds of TV cameras were waiting for this arrival. It had been carefully choreographed by the Trump campaign. Donald Trump himself, now the Republican nominee for president, arrived in a Trump helicopter just across from the convention center. And there he was welcomed by his running mate, Mike Pence, and his wife, Karen. Many people there watching. Donald Trump brought along his 4 adult children there. It was a huge spectacle, music blaring out. You really get a sense that the Trump campaign is trying to take back control here and trying to get across a positive message after the pretty scandalous start to this convention, when there have, of course, been these plagiarism allegations around Melania Trump's speech, which was supposed to be showing a human side, a softer side to Donald Trump. That all blew up, of course, into scandal. So now you get a sense that Donald Trump and his team are trying to redictate the terms of this and trying to come across as presidential already.
And of course, looking forward to Mike Pence's speech tonight. Do you think he'll be able to impress the boss now that he's been named running mate?
Well, all eyes will be on Mike Pence to see how he performs. And compared to Donald Trump, well, he's not at all as colourful a character. In fact, some people say that's why Donald Trump chose him as his running mate, to have a bit of stability, to choose a running mate that would reassure Republican voters and perhaps bring people to vote for the Trump ticket who would have otherwise been wary of doing so. So it'll be interesting to see just how much of a show Mike Pence can put on tonight. He's not particularly known for that. Also, it'll be interesting to see what he says about certain policies where he and Donald Trump simply don't agree. Mike Pence has come out on the proposed ban on Muslims entering the states that Donald Trump had floated. Other positions where they differ also, international trade, another big one. So it'll be interesting to see what he says on that. We can expect more Hillary bashing tonight. That's the one thing that's been uniting these speakers at this convention so far.
Catherine Norris-Trent in Cleveland, thank you very much for bringing us that latest update from the Republican National Convention. We'll be coming back to Catherine throughout the evening with more on that. 3 French soldiers have been killed in Libya. The French Defence Ministry has now confirmed that. Until now, Paris has never actually admitted having special forces in Libya. The furthest it would go was to admit its warplanes were carrying out reconnaissance flights in Libyan airspace. Catherine Clifford has the story. Catherine Clifford with that report. France's National Assembly has approved a 6-month extension to the state of emergency, which has now lasted more than 8 months. The decision was made after last week's truck attack on holiday crowds in Nice, the 3rd deadly assault on France in the last 18 months. Here's Prime Minister Manuel Valls speaking a little earlier today.
The bill submitted before you leads to a further extension. It is the 4th state of emergency for the same geographical area, the French mainland and its overseas department. The extension period has just been increased to 6 months by the work you have done in committee, which seems to me to be a good thing.
And tensions are running high after that attack on France last week, which was of course claimed by the Islamic State group. In Lyon, the words "Leave or Die" were sprayed on the wall of a mosque, and in Paris, police have cancelled an open-air film festival and also plans to turn the Champs-Élysées boulevard into a pedestrian zone over the summer. But it's not all bad news, because one summer festivity here in the capital will be going on as planned. That's Paris Plage, or Paris Beach. It's opened to the public along the banks of the River Seine with, of course, extra security. Now, you've heard of the driverless car, but how about a driverless bus? Well, German car maker Mercedes-Benz says the future of public transport will be self-driving. It's unveiled its new model equipped with the latest technology that spots traffic lights, other vehicles, pedestrians and bicycles. But if you thought the days of bus drivers are over, well, think again, because all this technology, beyond that, the human touch is still needed, just in case. And while this bus is being tested in Amsterdam, you won't be seeing it on the roads elsewhere anytime soon. Laws don't allow it yet. A fatal driverless car crash in the US, of course, in May means that changing that legislation is likely to take a little while. You're watching France 24. Let's remind you of our headlines. Republicans in the US gear up for day 3 of their party convention in Ohio. A trademark grand entrance for newly confirmed nominee Donald Trump, who will introduce his running mate for vice president. Turkey's president widens his purges across education, military and the courts in the wake of a failed coup on Friday. So far, about 60,000 have been dismissed or detained. And France extends its state of emergency by a further 6 months in the wake of last week's attack in Nice. The shockwaves reach Paris, where some outdoor events have been cancelled. Time for the business news now, and Will Hildebrandt is here in the studio. Hi, Will. Thanks for being with us. And after last week's attack in Nice, France's tourism industry is under pressure.
Yeah, that's right. Now, France is the most visited country in the world. Tourism accounts for about 8% of the GDP. Nice is the second most visited city in France, raking in about 1.5 billion euros annually. But since the attack, hotels, restaurants, and cafes are feeling the lull, and it's one that could last through summer. Shona Bhattacharya has more. One last story for you now. The Summer Olympics in Brazil kicks off in just a couple of weeks, and there will be 132 official Olympic stores. This story is not about any of those. A Rio sex shop called Hot Flowers has unveiled a new line of toys, costumes, and gels called Sex Athletes. The manager of the store says with the country experiencing its worst recession in more than a century, people are turning their attention elsewhere. I think those products will probably be quite popular in the Olympic Village.
I have a horrible feeling they might well be. Will Hildebrandt, thank you very much for the business news there. And we're just going to take you live now to some news from Turkey. President Erdogan is speaking. He's talking at the presidential palace in Ankara. Let's have a listen.
Experienced one of its most critical days in history. The Turkish armed forces, within the Turkish armed forces, which is of course our pride of nation, the pride of our nation and country, a group nestled in the Turkish armed forces broke the chain of command and attempted a coup. Those individuals in this group, understood to be members of the Gülenist terrorist organization, attacked its state and its nation using planes, helicopters, tanks, and all kinds of weaponry. The presidential complex, the Grand National Assembly of Turkey, the premises of the offices of the Prime Minister, the Chief of Staff, the General Command, the campus of the Turkish National Intelligence Agency, the Bosphorus Bridge, and various military units were heavily attacked. Thanks to the determined stance of me and my government, and of course the fact that our nation stood in the way of those coup plotters, and as a result of the effective interventions of our security forces, this attempt never succeeded. And in the face of our nation taking ownership of its country and of its determination, the weapons, the tanks, the helicopters, and the planes of the coup plotters amounted to nothing. Against terrorists in military fatigues, the people stood upright and took ownership of their homeland and their future, and our nation wrote epics of heroic bravery throughout the night. We had the young, the old, the employers, the bosses, the villagers, the urban settlers. Every member of our nation came together as one entity in the face of this attempt. Our citizens that said no to this saw tens of people being shot and being martyrized in front of their eyes. And of course they saw numerous people getting wounded and injured. And they tried to save those people under those dire circumstances, and until the early hours of the morning they continued their resistance. And thanks to God, everyone that feels themselves to be a member of this homeland and of this nation stood in the face of this attempted coup. Our nation had the sorrow of not being able to save Menderes and his friends and colleagues in the aftermath of the coup in 1960. In the aftermath of the coup in 1980, young people were executed, abiding by the idea of one from the right and one from the left, and those sufferings are still fresh in our memory. And 15th of July 2016 is a turning point when the nation put an end to this ill fate. For the first time in the history of our country, an armed coup attempt was crippled by the nation itself. And Turkey actually proved its allegiance to democracy and to the rule of law by paying a very high price, which is the lives of its citizens, as a result of the fire and shootings of the coup plotters. 246 innocent citizens, police officers and military personnel lost their lives. 1,536 innocent citizens were also wounded. On this occasion, I would like to honor the memory of the fallen, and I would like to wish speedy recovery to the wounded. I would like to convey my condolences to the relatives and families of those that lost their lives. I want to be very clear. Of course, it's no time to be dwelling on this political party or that other political party. As the president of this nation, I am proud of my country, of my people, and I do believe that with the nation we will overcome all of these obstacles, and this will go down in the history of democracy. It will be a heroic act of bravery from the hand of the Turkish nation. My beloved citizens, starting from the first moment the coup attempt became clear, The President, myself, the Prime Minister, ministers, our security forces, and the commanders of the armed forces that stood against the coup plotters, we all came together and worked in very close collaboration. Despite all dangers and all threats, I headed out to Istanbul immediately, and with my nation, of course, I stood against the coup plotters. In the face of the determination and the will of my nation, the attempt was completely stopped before the night or the evening of the following day. And today, on the 20th of July, we had the meeting of the National Security Council, which was then followed by a meeting of the Council of Ministers. The members of the National Security Council came together, did intensive and comprehensive assessments, and we decided to recommend to the government that a state of emergency be declared as per Article 120 of our Constitution in order for us to be able to speedily and swiftly deal with all of the elements of the terrorist organization. And the Council of Ministers also abided by that recommendation and decided to declare a state of emergency for a duration of 3 months. As it is known, Article 120 of our Constitution allows for a state of emergency to be declared in the event of acts of violence that aim to abolish democracy and cripple fundamental rights and freedoms. The purpose of the declaration of the state of emergency is, in fact, to be able to take the most efficient steps in order to remove this threat as soon as possible, which is a threat to democracy, to the rule of law, and to the rights and freedoms of our citizens in our country. This practice is absolutely not against democracy, the rule of law, and freedoms. Quite on the contrary, it has the purpose of strengthening and protecting these values. The attempted coup that we experienced clearly showed who are on the side of democracy and rule of law in Turkey by risking their lives and who are trying to impose their dictatorship. Our government, our political parties, our civil society, and the chain of command within the Turkish armed forces, and most important of all, our nation, they have always shown that their preference is on the side of democracy. On this occasion, I would like to also convey my deepest gratitude to my citizens that took to the streets, starting from the night of the 15th of July, that went to the squares and they stayed there. Regardless of their political party, political thought, or faith, all of my citizens that stood in the way of tanks are to be likened to the heroes of the Çanakkale or Gallipoli battles. They are to be likened to the lions as described by Mehmet Akif the poet. So they stood in the way of the tanks with all of their courage, and they even risked being martyrs.
Bu noktada tabii ki beraber yıllarca çalıştığımız arkadaşlarımızı da biz burada
unfortunately, we had to part ways with friends of many years who were killed during the incidents. So, a lady of 32 years of age was also killed after she was crushed by a tank. So these people are so heinous as to crash and squash a young woman by using a tank. That is how cruel these people are. So that lady is now a martyr. So they did not contend with that. they did not stop, but my nation, our nation, did not stop either. Tens were shot and wounded. Despite that, for hours, citizens did not leave their positions, and they have proven that they are indeed the descendants of the War of Independence. There were warplanes flying at low altitude, helicopters fired using heavy weaponry, and the streets were flooded by terrorists in military fatigues. Despite all of these things, my brothers and sisters did not leave, did not desert the streets, and their heroism leaves me no words to describe it. And although the attempt has now been brought to an end, my citizens have also been occupying the streets and the squares on a democracy watch so that the same thing cannot be attempted again, and their names will go down in golden letters in the memory of, in the history of democracy. So even today, starting from 4 p.m., people started flocking to Kızılay Square. Right now there are thousands of them in Kızılay Square. Tens of thousands of people are in Konya, and we will be having a video conferencing session with them, and I will be addressing those crowds. One very important point is the following. In Ankara, the Police Special Operations Unit and the Ankara Police headquarters came under heavy fire by the coup plotters, and despite that they never hesitated and they continued serving their nation, and the police officers and those others who remained in their positions and who fought till the end is worth of praise. Also, we have soldiers within the Turkish armed forces that stood against the attempted coup, and some of them lost their lives, and our nation will never forget their bravery and their sacrifice.
Kendilerine yanlış emir veren artık komuta bizdedir diyeni evet.
And there was also a case of a non-commissioned officer that killed a coup plotter because he could not obey by an order given to him. He himself was then killed by the plotters. Our governors, our municipalities, starting from the moment they were notified of this attempt, they used all of their forces to side with their nations. I would like to congratulate all of the administrators and executives in those places. Similarly, I would like to convey my gratitude to all media outlets and civil society organizations that sided with the will of the nation against the attempted coup. My dear nation, Turkey has displayed the strongest unity between the state and the nation in the face of the attempted coup on the 15th of July. The state came into unison with the nation, and the nation did the same exact thing. No citizen should have, or no institution should have, the slightest concern with regard to democracy, the rule of law, and the fundamental rights and freedoms. The state of emergency declared by our government has the purpose of protecting those very values from attacks against them. That is the main principle. Some European countries, of course, took similar steps in the face of terrorist incidents that are simply cannot be compared to what has happened in Turkey, and those who did not voice their concerns in the face of those incidents have no right to criticize this decision that we have made. They should first look at their own selves. We do not want the appreciation of anyone. They should simply stay out of our way. This nation has the might to determine its own destiny. Everyone should know that. And I would like to especially underline that the declaration of the state of emergency has the sole purpose of taking the necessary measures in the face of the terrorist threat that our country is facing, and also protecting democracy, the rule of law, and the fundamental rights and freedoms. Especially the domestic and international actors of our economy shouldn't have the slightest concern with regard to the implementation of the state of emergency. They should have no hesitation whatsoever. Now, S&P might have downgraded Turkey's credit standing from BB positive to BB and from static to negative, the outlook. But what do you have to do with Turkey? Turkey is not a member of yours. This organization, this institution did the similar things previously as well, and then we told them that we no longer wanted to have ties with them, and we put an end to those ties. Now they're declaring a political decision in their own mind, in their own consideration. It's a way for them of thinking maybe this will slow down the investments in Turkey. S&P, you would better do not meddle with Turkey, not mess with Turkey. You did the same thing in the past. It didn't work, and it won't work this time, because we will remain determined. We will continue the investments, and you will see that this is the case. We inaugurated the Osman Gazi Bridge, and on the 26th of August we will be inaugurating the Yavuz Sultan Selim Bridge. On the 20th of December, God willing, we will be inaugurating the Eurasia Tunnel, that will be a crossing under the sea in the Bosphorus. So this decision of yours will not mean anything, because we will continue with these investments and with these inaugurations. So this assessment does not reflect the realities of the Turkish economy. In these kinds of times, they can do anything. They in fact wait for and look forward to these kinds of moments. They will start spreading viruses in the markets. Why not? They will start taking different kinds of steps. But let me be very clear about one point. Turkey, in the upcoming period, will continue its economic reforms without any interruption, especially incentives with regard to increasing savings. The central bank also had very nice news, very good news to share, and it alleviated some concerns and removed some obstacles, and I think it will continue in the same vein. There will be no problem of liquidity in the market. It isn't the case. It will not happen. And we will remain very sensitive with regard to the market's own functioning, and we will pursue our rational economics policies. So we will never sacrifice from financial discipline, and we will continue as always. I would like to wish that the National Security Council meeting that we held today and the meeting of the Council of Ministers that followed will be beneficial for our nation. And what I have to say to my nation is this. People should not say, oh no, there is a state of emergency that has been declared. Will governors step out of office and will the armed forces take control? No, of course not. It will not happen. Quite on the contrary, the powers and the authorities of our governors will be further expanded and reinforced. The armed forces will be in the service of our governors under their command and control, and they will be part of the process. And we have never sacrificed anything from democracy, and we will never do so in the future. And the armed forces remain under the instructions of the government, and they will act in unison with the government. And as per the provision of our constitution, as the president elected to office by this nation, as the commander-in-chief, I will also attend to it so that all of the viruses within the armed forces will be cleansed. In other institutions, the Turkish National Police and others, as you have been observing, the cleansing is continuing, and we will remain very determined in cleaning all of these institutions from these elements, because it is very similar to a cancer virus. It is like a metastasis that's going on in the body that is Turkey, that is this nation, and we will clean it out so that the nation will continue to live in peace and tranquility and will remain hopeful of their future. I would like to remind this to my people, to my nation. Do not have any concerns. There is no reason to have any concerns. Turkey has overcome this challenge, and Turkey will come out of it as a stronger nation by investing more. And I would like to again convey my heartfelt emotions to all of you. May Allah protect all of you.
It was Turkey's President Erdogan speaking there from the presidential palace in Ankara, announcing a 3-month state of emergency in Turkey after the failed coup attempt on Friday, which he called an armed coup crippled by the nation. He said that the people who carried out that coup were terrorists in military fatigues, and they were stopped by the people who he was very proud of. He said of his 3-month state of emergency that this would not affect democracy, that Turkey had a commitment to democracy, to the rule of law, and to protecting freedoms. He also said that EU countries should not criticise the decision, given that some of them had also imposed their own states of emergency. Well, for more on this and listening in to that speech was our correspondent Jasper Mortimer, who's in Ankara, where that speech took place. He joins us now via Skype. And Jasper, we were expecting this speech from President Erdogan, but was Turkey expecting what he announced, that state of emergency and 3 months of it?
Only from today, the main opposition, the Republican People's Party, issued a statement this morning urging the government not to declare a state of emergency. The party leader, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, came out and said that all the parties in parliament had come out strongly against the coup attempt on Friday night. So it made no sense to therefore bypass parliament, which is what a state of emergency does. And also today, one of the other opposition parties in parliament, the pro-Kurdish HDP party, said that it would be completely against any anti-democratic action, which would include a state of emergency.
Erdogan was keen to point out that foreign countries, especially the EU countries, should not criticise this state of emergency, but so potentially showing that he might feel criticism could be on the cards.
Yes, he knows he's going to get criticism, but I think it's fair to say he's got a very tough skin against world pressure. All his talk about democracy, his commitment to democracy, his saying that the state of emergency will not compromise Turkish democracy, human rights and rule of law. To me, this shows that his definition of democracy and human rights is a very private one. It has no relation to the generally held concepts of democracy, human rights and rule of law. This is a politician who has, in the last 12 months, has closed numerous television channels and newspapers. And since he became president in August 2014, he has prosecuted nearly 2,000 people for insulting him.
Jasper Mortimer, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there for this hour, but we'll be coming back to you, I have no doubt, in 15 minutes' time when I'll be back with all the news. Eye on Africa's coming up next with Georgia Calvin-Smith. Do stay with us.